Have you ever really stopped to think about the rules of a language? You know, we usually think of grammar as this fixed, set-in-stone thing, but the truth? Those rules aren't just technical details. Nope. They can be the front lines for some really passionate ideological battles. And this, right here, is the story of one of the biggest, the Great Hebrew Grammar War.
So, when Hebrew was being revived as a modern spoken language, you'd think the process would be pretty simple. I mean, just dust off the oldest, most sacred text you've got, the Bible, and just use its grammar. That was the common thinking, anyway. Kind of the myth. But oh, the reality was so much more complicated and honestly, way more interesting.
Because what if I told you that the actual structure of modern Hebrew, the language spoken by millions of people today, was hammered out in a fierce debate over a single everyday object? This wasn't just some academic squabble. This was a war of words, all about the brim of a hat. No, seriously.
Okay, so to get how a hat brim could cause such a massive firestorm, we've got to rewind a bit, back to the early 20th century. The revival of Hebrew is in full swing, but everything, and I mean everything, is still on the table.
The action really starts to heat up around 1912. You've got the official language committee, the Vad Halashon, and they're trying to standardize everything. It feels like they're building the language from scratch, so every single decision feels monumental. This whole period, from about 1912 to 1928, is where all the crucial fights went down.
So picture this. The committee is working on a list of words for fashion and clothing. Pretty normal stuff. They need a word for the brim of a hat, and they find what seems like the perfect candidate in an ancient text.
The word is ogun. It's an old word found in the Mishnah. That's a foundational text of Jewish law from around 200 CE. So far, so good, right? Everybody's on board. Ogun it is. But then came the question that just stopped everybody cold.
How do you say brims? Seems simple, right? Well, this one question just ripped open a massive philosophical divide that had been simmering right under the surface the whole time.
Now take a look at this. These were the two choices they had. On the left, you've got the biblical model. It changes a vowel in the middle of the word to make it plural, giving you
oganim.
On the right, you have the Mishnaic model. It just adds the plural ending without changing the original word.
Ognim.
And this right here shows you the real problem. This wasn't just about one word. It was a choice between two completely different historical sources, two different versions of Hebrew's past, and that meant choosing between two totally different visions for its future. It was about the very soul of the language.
On one side, you had biblical Hebrew. I mean, this was the heavyweight champion. It was seen as the purest, most classical, most authentic form of the language. And a huge point in its favor was that its texts were fully vocalized. They had all the little vowel markings, which made its rules seem incredibly clear and stable. For most people, this was the obvious choice.
But then you had Mishnaic Hebrew, and the argument here was totally different. This was the last version of Hebrew that was an actual living, breathing, spoken language for people. Some folks argued its grammar was just more logical. And get this, to make things even more complicated, some scholars at the time were saying that certain Mishnaic forms might actually be older than the biblical ones, preserving a different ancient dialect.
So here's the most important thing to understand. This was never really about grammar. It was a proxy war, a culture war. It was a battle over identity. Should modern Hebrew be a perfect, pristine reconstruction of a sacred past, or should it be a flexible, living tool for a dynamic future?
And basically, three main camps emerged from this. You had the traditionalists, who believed language was this secret, eternal thing that you preserve, not change. Then you had the pragmatists, led by the legendary Eliezer ben Yehuda, who argued language has to be flexible to work in the modern world. And finally, the modernists, who wanted to update Hebrew and make it more like the big European languages they knew.
And just listen to this quote from Israel Iten, who was representing the teachers. He said, "Its form has been fixed for ages. We must guard with all our might the grammatical forms of the Hebrew language." This is a perfect example of what some people call linguistic Platonism. This idea that there's one perfect, eternal form of the language out there, and our only job is to protect it.
But standing in direct opposition to that idea was the giant of the revival movement himself, Eliezer ben Yehuda.
Ben Yehuda's goal was completely different. He was in the middle of compiling this massive, all-encompassing dictionary of Hebrew from every single historical period. For him, the walls between biblical, Mishnaic, and later Hebrew needed to be torn down. He wanted to use all of it to create a rich, expressive language for modern life. Practical use was way more important than historical purity. Meanwhile, you had other committee members, guys who are educated in Europe, and they're looking at languages like German, French, and Latin. They saw things in those grammars that Hebrew didn't have, and they started thinking, hey, why can't we borrow some of those ideas? Why can't we make Hebrew a bit more Western?
So you have this huge clash of ideas all colliding. Tradition versus progress, purity versus utility, East versus West. And it all came to a head in this one debate. So, what happened to our hat brim?
In the end, tradition won, and it wasn't even close. The committee overwhelmingly sided with the conservative view, cementing the biblical model as the grammatical standard for the revived language. All those bold, innovative ideas, they were pretty much swept aside.
And here's the really wild part. When the official dictionaries came out just a few years later, that whole fierce, soul-searching debate had completely vanished. The plural of
organ
was just listed as the biblical form.
Organim.
It's like the other option, and the whole culture war it stood for had never even existed.
This whole story of the hat brim is such a brilliant reminder that a language isn't something we just find, fully formed. It's something we build, day by day, through arguments, compromises, and our deepest beliefs about who we are and who we want to be. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the hidden hat brim debates shaping the way we speak right now?